Hey everybody, Kris White with the American Battlefield Trust, and we're in Mobile, Alabama, and this is really one of my favorite cities in the South. If you've never had the chance to visit Mobile, I encourage you to come down here. It's the home of Mardi Gras. Yeah, most people think it's New Orleans, but actually Mardi Gras started here in Mobile, and it's a really great city to come and visit. In fact, it really wasn't all that touched by the hard hand of the American Civil War, but it does endure throughout our Revolution, the War of 1812, and the American Civil War. It's a very important industrial center during the Second World War. So it's a really neat place to be and really to explore. Downtown is just off behind me, off to my right. But what you would probably want to do is come out here to one of its more out-of-the-way spots, and that's Magnolia Cemetery. Magnolia Cemetery is the home, or I should say the final resting place of more than 80,000 Mobilians. This cemetery was founded in 1836. It sits on more than 100 acres of Mobile city side, and it has some of the most impressive statuary that you will find throughout the South. In fact, it's probably the nicest cemetery you'll visit until you get over to New Orleans, about 2 hours down the road from where we're standing. But Magnolia Cemetery, it's a final resting place of a person named John Battle. If you've ever been to downtown Mobile, you've probably seen the Battle House Hotel, one of the finest hotels here in Mobile. He was the founder of it. No battle took place there at the Battle House like a lot of people think. The Battle House burned, I think, in 1905, on Valentine's Day 1905, but was rebuilt, and it's just a beautiful hotel. You'll also have some of the members of the Cowbellion and Raking Society. People are probably like, what is that? It's exactly what you would think. They go out and they get cowbells, they get rakes, and they actually put on these big carnivals, because this is a very festive town here in Mobile, and they're very proud of their Mardi Gras tradition, and this is one of those offshoots. We have other famous Mobilians buried here, but for our folks at the American Battlefield Trust, we have more than 1,100 Confederates buried over here in the Confederate section, Section 13 of Magnolia Cemetery, and that's known as Confederate Rest. I'll bring on Garry Adelman, Chief Historian, American Battlefield Trust, to talk a little bit more about this part of Magnolia Cemetery.
Yeah, thanks, Kris. Hello, everybody. When Kris mentioned more than 80,000 people buried here. I mean, 1,100 of them are right here in Confederate Rest. And on top of that, I want to stress this is a massive cemetery. You'd have to walk a while to get all around it. And even it's bigger than it looks, because adjacent to it, there's also a national cemetery. We might be talking about that as well. But come on over here, Chris M. Chris Mackowski behind the camera there. We can get a good look at Confederate Rest here. It was established. This is actually a wartime Confederate cemetery established in 1862 and in one plot or one square. I think it's number 12 or 19.
13.
Thank you, 13, of Magnolia Cemetery here. And, taking the largest picture around here, you can see that there's something sort of special on every corner. Right here, we have a memorial to those who perished on the Hunleys. Of course, there are multiple Confederate submarines that go down. It's the third one that famously goes down in Charleston Harbor. Don't call it the CSS Hunley, it's the H.L. Hunley for Horace L. Hunley. And him, as well as the Commander George Dixon, are actually memorialized over here. Were we to go a little bit further, and Kris, you can pan off of me because I'm wearing a mic. Check this out. We're all fancy because Kris White helps us be. If you pan off straight ahead, there's a very well-known burial in the corner. We're going to wait until we get there to show you that one. There's also a central monument here right in the middle of Confederate Rest. Well done, Kris Mackowski, navigating all sorts of troublesome terrain here. That is a monument to the Confederate dead, established in 1874. Raphael Semmes himself was here to help with the unveiling. And there actually used to be a Confederate soldier on top. There isn't anymore, but it's not why you think, actually, or why you might suspect. It was actually lightning that did that in, but we do still have some of it, and we'll show you a little bit of that before long as well. If you go right along here, you can see the corner is memorialized with the Alabama State Artillery, and on the far corner, if it's even visible, if not, we'll B-roll it in, you can see something to the Mobile Cadets as well. So it's very sensibly laid out, and here the main focus, of course, is on these 1,100 Confederates, and we'll walk along some of them right now. You can actually look at them. You'll see some familiar units if you're used to the Western Theater, and if you are not, you will become familiar as you go along. You'll also see a lot of unknown and a lot of ones who are known, but their units are not known. There's a lot of sort of reserve artillery and reserve infantry here and whatnot. I actually went past something, and thanks to Kris White for passing it, for pointing it back out here. Here you can actually focus in on an unknown soldier who was part of a very famous Confederate raider, and that is, of course, the CSS Alabama. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that sounds like Raphael Semm's ship to me as well. And here he is, killed in action on June 19th, 1864. And here he is, this unknown soldier, brought back to Mobile, Alabama, appropriate given the ship that he was actually on. Now, as we walk this way, we're making our way up toward the Mobile Rifles, if I'm correct, and that's going to be a monument right in front of us. What's interesting about this one, and I think you'll enjoy seeing it, is that it's a rather small monument, but it has a large kind of bust and more. There's even more than a bust on top of it, and you can see that it's jagged on the bottom. I hope the sun works, and you can kind of see that it doesn't look like it was made for this. Indeed, it wasn't. This is what remains of the statue that was struck by lightning that used to be on the central monument here in Confederate rest. One more thing as we walk up here. I think I'll turn it over to Kris because he's better on people than I am. But here's the famous, most famous burial here in Confederate rest, and we'll let Kris take over here.
Yeah, this is probably the general everyone loves to hate, or at least loves to tease about, and that's Braxton Bragg. One quote that comes out about Braxton Bragg is that Jefferson Davis can't even do what God himself tried to do, and that is make a general officer out of Braxton Bragg. But poor Bragg sometimes gets the short end of the stick. And ironically, he gets his Civil War start, or under his Civil War career, over in Pensacola, about an hour to the east of here. In fact, the Civil War almost started at a place called Fort Pickens. And Braxton Bragg was down there playing a key role in the capture of that city, as well as the naval yard over at Pensacola. And Braxton Bragg will start his real Confederate career over there. And actually, he let cooler heads prevail, and the Civil War didn't start there, but unfortunately started up in Charleston, South Carolina. His army will actually come through here as they make their way towards Perryville. The largest troop movement of the war for the Confederacy will move from around Corinth, Mississippi, down through the Deep South, over here to Mobile, which was a rail center, and then eventually up towards Chattanooga, Tennessee, and then up into that Heartland offensive in 1862. Eventually, Bragg will come down here with his wife and after the war and pass away. But Braxton Bragg, he is the highest ranking officer buried here in Confederate rest inside of Magnolia Cemetery. Over on the other side, Garry pointed out the Mobile Cadets. The Mobile Cadets took part in the battle for Fort Morgan and the defense of Mobile at one point. They ranged anywhere from 12 years old, I believe, to 16 years old when they were serving there, and I think maybe over at Spanish Fort. I might have them two mixed up. There's a lot of actions that took place here. And then, of course, looking back across, you get a nice view of what this portion of the Magnolia Cemetery looks like here in Mobile. So if you ever get a chance, I encourage you to come out here. And this isn't the only portion of the cemetery that we're actually going to explore. We're going to go over to that annex of the Federal National Cemetery, which is over not too far from where we are, but this is such a large cemetery. It's probably as much as 120 acres. If you look at this thing on the map, if you put Google Earth, and maybe we'll drop a Google Earth view into here, you will see just the footprint of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut for a moment, and we're going to magically appear back over in another portion of the cemetery, and that is the National Cemetery here at Mobile.
Chris Mackowski, switching from behind the camera to in front of the camera. We were just a few moments ago about a third of a mile in that direction to the Confederate section of Magnolia Cemetery, known as Confederate's Rest. You can see behind me downtown Mobile and the spires of downtown rising up above this beautiful historic cemetery. We're now in the National Cemetery portion of Magnolia Cemetery. In 1866, the city of Mobile donated 3 acres to the federal government so that they could inter war dead from the area. Soldiers from Fort Gaines, Fort Morgan were brought here. Folks who had died during the assaults at Fort Blakely were brought here. Some 900 federal soldiers were used to establish this cemetery, which was laid out in 4 sections around a central flagpole. A decade later, as per the rules, they added a brick wall around this section of the cemetery, which of course has since been removed. In 1881, they added a house for the caretaker of the cemetery to live, and that's how many national cemeteries existed. But this remained an active cemetery, and so there are actually not only Civil War interments here, but there are interments from a number of other wars since then. And it's really interesting to see Mississippi on the front of one of these, and it's actually a soldier maybe who was killed in World War I. Behind me you can see a monument to the 76th Illinois. They attacked at the Battle of Fort Blakely, which took place on April 9th, 1865. Even as Robert E. Lee was surrendering in the parlor of Wilmer McLean at Appomattox Courthouse, there's still action going on here. The city of Mobile doesn't even fall until a couple days after that. So things are really heating up here at that time, even as they're quieting down in other areas. Now, as this cemetery continued to grow, it actually expanded across the street. Another 3 acres was added over there, and more interments were added over there as well. In the 1930s, the United Daughters of the Confederacy actually added a monument over there to mark the outer defenses of the city of Mobile. And so they're kind of putting their stamp not only on the Confederate section of the cemetery, but here in the national section as well. I'm going to bring Garry Adelman back on because he's pretty fascinated by some of the other Confederate footprints that are here in a national cemetery.
Yeah, that's a perfect interlude, Kris. Thank you. Hello, everybody, again. There are certain rules about national cemeteries. Kris talked about some of those already. They put around that distinctive brick wall. Many of them have a gatehouse with Gettysburg Address text printed on it. Sometimes they have the Theodore O'Hara Mexican War poem, The Bivouac of the Dead, around there. But there's a lot of squishy areas too. Remember, this is a national cemetery, but we are in the South. And let's remember that we're a national cemetery right next to a Confederate cemetery in a southern cemetery, Magnolia. So when you come here, you don't only have northern dead in this cemetery. They're not consistent on this at various national cemeteries. So if we were to walk over there, not only would we see a co-monument for the Union and Confederate naval forces who fought around here, but separate monuments for the Confederate dead who died at the Battle of Coffeyville, to the Confederates on the H.L. Hunley, to the Confederates who fought on the CSS Alabama, I believe, has monuments over there. We'll try to show you some of that as well. And where you might be able to see an octagonal sort of rostrum over there, a platform that is undergoing construction right now, there are 4 Confederate soldiers actually buried underneath there as well. So we have sort of a mix. And another thing when you come here is that, man, just walking a row here, I was seeing Kansas, Missouri, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, all mixed in together here. And they're not specific, especially as we get to the United States colored troops, numerous of which I saw over in that direction there. Were these killed in the Battle of Fort Blakely? Are these post-war deaths of some of these soldiers who were here later? Or are these soldiers, these USCT soldiers in this case, positioned here later? Remember, they joined the war later and they were serving out the post-war period a lot more as a percentage than the white soldiers here. So there's a lot of stories to be uncovered here. We don't have time in this video to really uncover them all. I would just encourage you to come to Magnolia Cemetery, come to Confederate Rest, and come to the National Cemetery here at and around Magnolia, and that can be a great part of your visit to Mobile, Alabama.